A little about the architecture that brought together the very broad coalition that we have now. I think it's really good that we're looking back. As someone with a degree in history, I always am hesitant to use the word unprecedented, but in many ways I think what we faced in '86 was unprecedented, but now we can't say that because we do have this history to look back on. Well, part of the picture in terms of how churches and community groups like the ones I represent in the evangelical world came to be engaged with immigrants came through our work with refugees. In the past, the U.S. Admitted refugees on a rather haphazard and ad hoc basis when there were crises around the world. But after the end of the Vietnam War, it became very clear that that was not going to work because the volume of people needing resettlement was just too high. So that led to the State Department inviting leaders of many different religious and community groups to set up programs to welcome and care for and resettle refugees. So World Relief was asked to do that for the evangelical Christian community in the United States. And that was formalized, this whole system formalized in 1980 with the Refugee Act, which continues to guide the way that we work with refugees from around the world. But here in Illinois, we were blessed to have, as Craig's already mentioned, a visionary state refugee coordinator, Ed Silverman, who put together a very strong program that not only incorporated the faith and community groups, but also many of the other actors, including ethnic and community organizations and legal groups and so forth. And so as the IRCA program, IRCA law came into being, there was already quite a history of groups working together, which I think was very helpful. Now, in the beginning, there was a network that was more focused on refugees, called the Chicago Network for Refugee Protection, I think it was. And then the CCIP was, as Craig's already mentioned, called into being. And so we began to see that the two networks were really working on very much overlapping issues, and that it would be good if we could work together. So that's what led us, our two groups, to merge to become the CCIRP. So the R was, that's where the R came from. Now, in terms of the experience, our experience of what we did in World Relief was we, on a national level, called together a group of our member denominations representing churches all over the country to work together to stand up a program that we call the Houses of Hope movement to help with the processing of applications. And here in Chicago, we set up with local churches 6 different sites around the city and one out in Page County. And then many other churches became information centers. Now, this is a model that we are trying to replicate now. And my colleague Damon Schrader, who's in the back there, wave your hand, has just launched a couple weeks ago what we call the Immigration Alliance, which is another national movement of evangelical churches that are setting up legal services through church-based programs for immigrants that I think will be very helpful. Now, when this, as has already been mentioned, this law was announced, and then there was a very short window for implementation. There was a lot of uncertainty, and so what I recall is going to a lot of community meetings, informational meetings. So it'd be large numbers of people, and so then we would get a lawyer to come and talk and say, here's what blah blah blah, here's what the law says, although we don't really know how it's going to work out. And then there was a million questions, and we said, well, what about my case? And of course, you can't do that in a large group. So there's just general confusion. And in this atmosphere of confusion, there are a couple of groups that come to the front. The first I call the charlatans. Those are groups or individuals say, well, don't worry, I can help you, just give me some money and we'll figure this out. And that was a big problem. And then the second group were well-meaning but unprepared people. And a lot of ethnic churches and pastors, many of their members are undocumented and they're desperate for help, and so they say, well, I don't know everything, but I'm going to do what I can to help. And in the process, sometimes the help turned out not to be helpful because they made mistakes that had long-term consequences. As we set up the processing centers and trained staff, we were able to address those issues. But we found that most of the cases were rather difficult. Only probably about a quarter of the cases that came to World Relief were what I call straightforward cases, where they have basically everything in order, all the papers, and they just hand you the file and you just have to fill out the forms. Most of the cases were very complicated. In one case, my colleague Trini Hernandez, who's still doing this work now, shared a man came in and he gave her 5 matchbooks from the 5 different restaurants where he had worked, and that was all he had. 5 matchbooks. But doing some sleuthing and background work, Trini was able to piece together enough of a history that his case was approved. There were many cases like that. What we found also is that people are people, they're not only immigration cases, and so people can come for help with their application, but they also have family issues, their kids are maybe having trouble, maybe there's marriage issues. And so being that we were churches doing this work, we found ourselves engaged in a whole broad range of responses that sometimes weren't only focused on immigration. But I was pleased that we had staff that were prepared to help in other ways as well. There are also a lot of ethical issues that came up, the people who were frankly ineligible or possibly ineligible, but who presented fraudulent documents. And Trini shared with me yesterday that she said a man came in and gave her some papers, and she looked at them and said, "Where did you buy these?" And he told her where he bought them. And he said, "Just here, I'll pay you the money. Just I need my papers." And she was saying, "Oh, well, sorry, we're not able to help with that." And maintaining an ethical commitment when there are urgent human needs sitting right in front of you, but yet you know that if you don't maintain that ethical commitment, that not only would you be in jeopardizing this person, but the whole program as well. So those are some of the challenges that I think we'll see in whatever iterations of this kind of work that can continue. So just a couple of lessons, and here I'm indebted to my colleague Tim Omsteds, who worked very closely with me in this process. He said, measure twice, cut once. And the need to prepare and not just jump into things before you're ready. Then the importance of working together, and the coalition that we have now is a strong base for that. Something we, as I said, we had some elements of it back in '86, but we have a much stronger base now for working together. And then the advocacy is, has already been mentioned, needs to happen on many levels. There's insider advocacy, and outside there's local and there's national, and these need to be coordinated, not meshed together, but coordinated. And I think we're doing that. And in the work I do now in Washington, continue to work on immigration reform, and I'm very grateful for the work that you all are doing here in Chicago.